We are deeply sorry for this tragedy. The responsibility for this crime rests solely upon the perpetrator.
They are going to attract criminals and crimes will happen, and they don't want to take responsibility for them.
The reality is crashing in on them so fast now that they can't sustain the delusion much longer. Welcome to No Border, No Country. What is going on with sanctuary cities in America? It's been a problem for a while now, and it seems to be getting worse. I'm joined by Judge Matt O'Brien. Matt, thanks for being here today again.
Thanks.
And we have a special guest with us today. Daniel Greenfield is a Shillman Journalism Fellow at the David Horowitz Freedom Center, as well as being an investigative journalist and writer. Daniel, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, so you had an article in Front Page Magazine recently about an incident in Washington, D.C. regarding a person here illegally, legal trouble he got into. Tell us a little bit about the story you wrote.
So Washington, D.C., as people may know, is a sanctuary city. If some Democrats have their way, it would be a sanctuary state because they like statehood for it, which, unlike some places which have been backing away from the status, reaffirmed it. And we had a really horrendous incident where there was an illegal alien who was using a fake name. He was in for, and he was, police had come out over an animal cruelty call, some of which had been videotaped. They came out, he opened fire on them. He wounded 3 officers. And, this is one of those stories that just gets treated as a local crime story, but it's also emblematic of what is going on around the country. Much of the crime rate is driven by major cities, something people don't necessarily know. The media very much focuses on these so-called mass shootings. If there's a school shooting, it's going to be on the news for a month. But most of the crime, most of the shootings, most of the violence is happening in major cities. It's also happening in cities that tend to be sanctuary cities. And the question is really what percentage of the crime rate is indeed driven by illegal aliens, by migrants? That's the debate we're having in the media. And of course, the media is predictably putting its hand on the scales and claiming that experts show that people who illegally enter the country are no more likely to engage in violence. Now, we have a number of cases. This is one of them. The Laken Riley murder is another that show that we actually are being impacted significantly by illegal alien crime.
Now, the organization that we are affiliated with, the Federation for American Immigration Reform, took a look at this, and they compared, I was actually one of the authors of the report, compared state criminal alien assistance program data to Texas DPS data. And the conclusion that we drew is that people who entered the country illegally were about 3 times more likely to commit crimes than immigrants who were lawfully here or U.S. citizens. Has that been your experience when you have looked at this kind of data?
Well, first of all, I just want to say that FAIR is a wonderful group, and I definitely make use of its data when writing about immigration issues. But yes, obviously the first point is that people who illegally enter the country are already committing a crime, which is a point that is often overlooked. But it's not just, a technical point. It means that the people are more predisposed to commit crimes in general. If you start out violating the law, committing a crime, what's to stop you from committing more crimes? And the answer really is nothing. To even function here, in many cases, illegal aliens have to continue committing various crimes, such as identity fraud, identity theft, which in the DC case that we just discussed, he had stolen somebody's name, was using a fake ID. We're not even 100% sure if the name that we have for him is the actual name. And this is also often the case. So you start out with illegal border crossing, then you start out with identity theft. And how do you steal identities? Well, in many cases, these people are already involved with illegal organizations, whether it's cartels, whether it's other criminal groups that are smuggling them into this country, that are sponsoring them. It costs a good deal of money to be an illegal alien who's entering through the southern border. Some of these people are actually coming with the money. Others are being sponsored. We see this out of Asia. We also see this out of Latin America, which means these people are going into debt to criminal organizations. Once they're here, they start working for these criminal organizations. For Asians, for example, there's this entire bus network that moves people around in illegal low-wage pay. Their marijuana growing operations and other criminal operations, particularly those involved with cartels. So it's not as if, these people just cross the border legally, then they get regular jobs. That's the argument now. We need to get them work permits so they can work regularly. These people are in many cases sponsored by organized crime. Even if you get them work permits here and they're working in theory legally, we won't even parse what the term illegally means. The money is going to organized crime. So by bringing them here, by giving them some kind of legalization, we are enmeshed in an organized crime situation. We're funding organized crime, and they're conducting activities on behalf of organized crime, and a bunch of those activities are going to be illegal. Whether it's growing marijuana, we're seeing this, in strange places like Maine, for example, or it's working illegally on various projects, or it's smuggling. We're seeing fentanyl being smuggled across the border, and so on and so forth.
Daniel, the man who admitted to accidentally firing the gun that killed Kate Steinle in San Francisco, he was a 5-time deportee, and he told police that he was asked, why did you come to San Francisco before that incident? And he said, because he had heard it was a sanctuary city. A lot of these mayors, now the situation seems to be spinning out of control, they're very quick to blame Greg Abbott. And they'll say, well, he brought this problem upon us. But can you talk a little bit about the lure of the sanctuary city? How much of a role does that play in incentivizing people to want to make that trip over the border?
Absolutely. You look at Chicago and New York City, and they're screaming about the huge number of illegal aliens that they are dealing with, and they're blaming this all on Governor Abbott in Texas. Well, the reality, one the media doesn't want to talk about, is Abbott and Texas are in no way capable of transporting the number of illegal aliens, migrants that are bringing these cities to their knees. Texas is, doing a few buses. The vast majority, and the people who are boarding them, they're not being boarded, not being forced on a gunpoint. They were claiming this with DeSantis and Abbott. They're tricking these people to somehow. It's human trafficking. Forget the fact that the entire process of moving these people across the border is human trafficking and resettling them. They want to go. They want to go to places like Chicago and New York and DC because, in part, yes, they've been told they're sanctuary cities, and beyond immigration enforcement, which these days is, practically non-existent. The other thing that a sanctuary city means to them is that there is an available welfare system. There's this infrastructure there that is ready to accommodate them and take care of them. So they're not. Some of the criminals are obviously worried about being handed over to immigration authorities, and those people are obviously going to go to sanctuary cities because they are being told that they are not going to have to worry about being deported there. So obviously they're going to want to go to sanctuary cities. And even those who are not necessarily planning to commit a whole crime spree are themselves going to go to sanctuary cities because there are vast welfare benefits. And these cities themselves have invited this on themselves. They've done this. It's not Abbott's fault. It's not DeSantis' fault. It's not the fault of some Republican governors, for that matter, in Denver, where they're busing them to Texas. The problem is that they themselves have declared these areas to be sanctuary cities, which means you get arrested. These are also pro-crime cities. So you get arrested. There's no bail in many cases. You get released a few hours later. You get arrested again. You get released again. You have a court date 6, 8, 12 months from now. You get to a diversion program. They understand that there are no consequences for this. You're not going to get deported. You're probably not going to go to jail. And if you do go to jail, it's going to be a process that's going to take a long time. So sanctuary cities are absolutely fantastic. They're sanctuaries for crime. They're sanctuaries for illegal migration, and they have everything to offer.
Now, you mentioned earlier that the organized crime cartels are getting rich off of this, as well as other types of organized crime organizations, gangs, etc. One of the things that shocked us as we have been looking at this is the NGOs that are involved in this and the hotels and other groups. And it seems to me that as the border is being dismantled, there's a significant amount of money being funneled directly into organizations that have a specific view of the border. So as the crisis goes on, they seem to get richer.
Yeah, there's a massive infrastructure of these, and I've profiled some of them in the past. There's one organization that is very open about moving them illegally across the border. No More Death. They're affiliated with, I believe, a Methodist or Presbyterian church in the area. They even got this Amazon wish list for all the things that migrants need to illegally cross the border. They drop food for them. They drop supplies for them. Some of their members have been arrested and tried in Texas, but they couldn't get convictions for them. And of course, the more serious ones are the ones who actually cross the border. They provide legal help for them. They walk the illegal aliens across the border. And by the way, we mentioned 501c3s earlier. All these groups are 501c3s, despite the fact that they are A, dedicated to violating United States law, and B, they are actually enabling illegal activity. So both of those things are no-nos for 501c3s, yet these groups are able to operate. I've done a whole series on illegal alien groups that operate with the complicity of the IRS, part of a series about the general complicity of the IRS in all sorts of illegal activity, including terrorism, crime, etc. Anyway, These groups have obviously been bulked up, especially around the Trump administration. The border became more of a focus. They rushed resources to them. A bunch of groups that were not even that focused on the border became more activated, became more focused on it, like the ACLU, Southern Poverty Law Center. Suddenly, all these groups started developing an interest in the border situation. They found grantees, and there are plenty of these groups now operating on both sides of the border. And those on the other side of the border make sure that the illegal aliens, the convoys, are not going to dissipate, that they're going to have food, that they're going to have shelter, whatever, while they wait on the Mexican side of the border. And then they walk them across. They have lawyers with them who actually tell them everything that they need to say, because in the past, you could have caught these guys out. Now they have their own lawyers that are briefing them, and they can walk across a whole lot of illegal aliens in a single day, because you've got the one lawyer, they've got the prepared spiel, they've briefed them on exactly what to say. If they say something wrong, the lawyer steps in. So it's hard to underestimate just how effective this is at bypassing this. Part of the so-called border deal was that they were going to process asylum requests much more rapidly. The reality is that in the current system, the asylum requests are likely to succeed because they have now been very much prepped and briefed and told exactly what to say. They're not going to say the wrong thing. And even in the past where there have been asylum issues, overall, they tend to err on the side of the illegal aliens, and that's just the reality of it.
So basically what's going on is there's an assembly line that's making pro-illegal alien anti-borders groups rich, along with making criminal organized crime outfits rich.
And the two are obviously interacting with each other, because if you want to have like these massive convoys that we've seen on the news heading up, you need to deal with organized crime. They're going to want their piece of the action. You do not just do this as a civilian group. And if you have NGOs, then they are most likely working with organized crime to some degree. This sounds shocking to some people, but it's not unusual. We've seen this with terrorists. For example, the whole discussion about Israel and Hamas and unrun nonprofits. If you operate in territories controlled by terrorists or criminal cartels, they are going to want a piece of the action. Most people don't know that the Taliban made much of their money actually from shaking down nonprofit groups that we were funding to reconstruct and bring help to Afghanistan. The same thing is true south of the border. When we put money in there, a portion of that is going to go to the cartels, just like the mafia. You don't do business there without paying them. So these convoys are unquestionably interacting with cartels. They're paying them, and they're doing favors for them, because the cartels are not just going to want money. They're going to want people who are going to carry something along. They're going to want their members to join these convoys. So, we discussed two violations of United States law. This is absolutely a third, and it is absolutely going unscrutinized with no interest outside of some people who are deep in the weeds.
Dan, there was a crime on this topic in Georgia last month. Young girl, Laken Riley, was killed, and it's dominated the news ever since. We wanted to play a short clip here for you, a news story about the mayor of Athens who held a press conference recently, and then I'd like to get your thoughts on it afterwards. So let's take a look at this.
Time for questions.
You are guilty and got blood on your hands for this murder, sir.
At a news conference in Athens on Wednesday, protesters accused Athens Clark County Mayor Kelly Girtz of creating a sanctuary city in Athens, which they say led to the killing of Laken Riley, despite the suspect in the case, Jose Ibarra, being arrested previously.
And no policies have been adopted by the mayor and commission that have created sanctuary city status in Athens.
Protesters disagree.
May 20, 2019.
Citing that on August 20th of 2019, a resolution was signed by Girtz in support of Athens' immigrant, undocumented, and Latinx community.
You called me a white supremacist in your resolution.
In the resolution, Athens Clark County leaders denounced white supremacy. Girtz claims the political climate at the time necessitated that language.
Where you had the President of the United States speaking in the most vile terms about people who were foreign born.
The purpose of the news conference was to discuss proposed security measures, including expanding a real-time crime center, more security cameras, and a mobile surveillance trailer. But the sanctuary city issue took center stage.
Son, I'm going to ask you to leave.
Protesters like James Lee say the resolution from 2019 should immediately be rescinded, blaming the resolution and Girtz for Riley's death.
We are deeply sorry for this tragedy. The responsibility for this crime rests solely upon the perpetrator.
These protesters are now calling for Mayor Girtz to resign.
You're fired! You need to go, sir.
The new security measures will be up for approval here at City Hall on Tuesday at 6.
Dan, I don't know how much research you may have done into that story, but again, it's been everywhere. What is your take on that situation and what in reaction to what the mayor was saying there?
So one of the things we need to do is walk back to the original rationalizations for sanctuary cities or sanctuary states. They didn't sell them on the idea that, we're just going to have a free-for-all day claim. And, Obama obviously most prominently made this claim that they were actually making things safer by not actually cooperating with immigration authorities. They would argue that the criminalization of illegal aliens, cooperating with immigration authorities prevented them from coming forward and reporting crimes, and that they were actually going to make places safer by not cooperating. And that was, of course, proven to be false. They certainly had no such intentions for doing so, and they would claim that they were, really exercising discretion, that they were really making things safer by avoiding frivolous immigration interventions and criminalizing people just because of their immigration status. So two things were going on. They were trying to break the connection between criminality and illegal aliens, and they were trying to claim that they were actually making things safer. Every time something like this happens, it is very clear that they are not making things safer, and they have no coherent response to that, which is what we tend to see over and over again. You actually confront them with illegal aliens who commit crimes, whether it's the Laken Riley case, whether it's the Timecodes case, which you mentioned previously, or so many other cases involving angel moms, people whose children were killed by illegal alien drunk drivers or just criminals. Immediately, the authorities default into this kind of panicked mode where they try to project outward. They claim overall the policy is working perfectly well when they know exactly what the problem is. The problem is that they've chosen to decriminalize what is a crime. And as we discussed earlier on, crime follows a crime. You have people who start out engaging in criminal behavior, they're going to continue engaging in criminal behavior. The people whom attracted by places that either formally describe themselves as sanctuary cities or locations, or informally do so, who place any limits on cooperation with immigration authorities, they are going to attract criminals and crimes will happen, and they don't want to take responsibility for them. You could really respect their principles to some degree if they would at least take responsibility for it, if they would say, well, we believe the trade-off is worth it. Some people may be killed, yes, but on the other hand, we're protecting all these people from being deported to their home countries where they would be killed as well. But they pretend that there's no cost benefit. They pretend that there's not going to be, nobody's going to suffer from this. And the moment that happens, they are absolutely incapable of defending the blood on their hands.
So, Daniel, what do you think it is about immigration law that prompts this kind of reaction? Because you never hear about, environmental law sanctuary cities or, Second Amendment. I can just see the people I grew up with in Massachusetts. If Massachusetts unilaterally declared itself a whaling sanctuary. So what is it about immigration that makes people think that it's just okay for everyone, including state governments, to ignore the federal immigration laws?
The bottom line is that there's a double standard, and it's an ideological double standard. People on the left want to create a space in which they are free to violate the law for their own political gain and not be held accountable for it. So yes, a state is not going to declare itself a tax sanctuary state, a place where you're not going to cooperate with the IRS because they want to cooperate with the IRS. Likewise, they're not going to declare themselves a sanctuary state for abortion protesters, even though some states maybe would consider doing that, where they're not going to cooperate with the FBI when it comes to raiding people who are non-violently protesting abortion. But in areas that the left supports, but that are technically illegal, that they have not managed to completely do away with as far as the law goes, they've created these sanctuary cities because they do want illegal immigration. It's been made very clear. The latest deal, for example, the so-called Senate border deal, makes it very clear that they want to continue the state of affairs. The Biden administration was willing to offer various things. The one thing they were not willing to offer was detention. They were not willing to actually prevent these illegal aliens who are coming across the border from being released. So this is something that they want. And when it's something that they want, whether it's crime, whether it's illegal migration, then they will create sanctuaries for it, like Chaz, giving them space to destroy in Baltimore. They will create sanctuary spaces for this illegal activity. And it is a grotesque double standard because on the one hand, you have the federal government and the courts saying to Texas and to other states, you cannot enforce any kind of immigration laws. You can't even enforce your own laws. You can't secure your own borders. But on the other hand, states, of course, are able to entirely ignore federal laws. So there's supreme federal authority over immigration when it comes to, in theory, enforcing immigration law by not enforcing it, but states have no ability to, but states have the ability to completely ignore the enforcement of federal immigration law if they choose. Like California, they can entirely ban local enforcement, local sheriffs from cooperating with immigration authorities. So this is a double standard. It's the two sets of books that we see so often in American jurisprudence when it comes to the priorities of the left versus the priorities of normal Americans who want an end to the crime. They want an end to the flooding of their cities and their communities with mass numbers of invaders.
Dan, there's been a lot of reporting about the cost of these sanctuary policies to cities. We see Eric Adams going to his state government and to the White House looking for assistance in the range of billions of dollars. What do you see as the future of these sanctuary cities? Because it seems like the reality is crashing in on them so fast now that they can't sustain the delusion much longer. Are we reaching a tipping point where it's going to be like, oh, this was a failed experiment and we got to do something else? Or are they going to continue the delusion and just try to keep it going as long as they can?
Oh, it's a massive hit to the welfare system. New York City, Denver, Chicago, a number of other communities, cities are actually cutting things like lunch programs for kids. The Parks Department, in order to be able to afford to pay for, tens of thousands of people just showing up and demanding shelter, demanding food, demanding welfare services. I actually did a breakdown because a few months ago, the Biden administration was hyping its the jobs report. And when you actually dig into the numbers of the jobs report, much of that growth seems to have been happening in governmental jobs, and at least 1 in 10 of those jobs were actually in the welfare sector. Now, what could be suddenly driving up a whole lot of employment in the welfare sector? So you're going to need a whole bunch of people being hired just to take care of this mass invasion. It is absolutely hitting these sanctuary cities really hard. That said, the longer end game is demographic transformation of the United States for political gain, which is why the Biden administration is continuing to double down. And a few politicians like Mayor Eric Adams have been critical. Some, even though they got to the point where the governor of Illinois was somewhat critical of the White House, but they're keeping the criticism somewhat restrained because they do understand that there is a bigger picture here and that the left absolutely supports this and is not going to back down from this. What they really want is, and this is something they've been pretty open about, they want work permits, they want legalization, they want to move this forward into the amnesty phase as soon as possible, and they also want to move it on to the resettlement phase. They'd like to take these people out of the cities, they'd like to take them out of New York City and Chicago and Denver, and they'll move them particularly into Texas. And a lot of people don't want to be in Texas, which is a problem. They want to move them into red states, into redder areas for their plan for demographic transformation. These people, of course, are not cooperating, and Congress is not giving them the funding that they want, which is in one part whether they keep demanding a border deal. The border deal would just allow them to quickly process them and then resettle them, which is what they've been doing before. By the way, one of the components of the border deal is also resettling and legalizing all the Afghans, the six-figure number of Afghans that Biden just illegally brought into the United States, and allow them all sorts of other ways to bring them into the country. So a lot of people are indeed suffering, but they're also suffering from high crime rates, and the response in the policymaking apparatus has been, so what? This is part of the program. We're going to put on some virtue signaling, we're going to hold some conferences, we're going to go here and there, we're going to take some photo ops, but in the larger sense, it is part of our bigger agenda, and so we have to keep going. Biden even facing, particularly political damaging atmosphere going into an election has still really not changed his policies in any significant way. There was the expectation that he might sign at least an executive order for show at the border. He did not actually get around to doing that, which really suggests that the party is still very much committed to the long game. They are playing the long game, which requires open borders. People may be upset. A lot of African-American people, particularly in major cities, are upset, but they're just being treated as collateral damage for this long-term, long march through the demographic transformation of the country.
Now, our research has shown that one of the major problems with bringing people in these kinds of numbers and this quickly is that people don't assimilate. And that seems to be having a significant effect because what we're seeing as we track the news lately is a lot of crimes that seem to be due to cultural differences, sexual crimes against children, abuse of women. Is that something we need to be concerned about over the long haul?
way I put it to people is, do you want to live in Venezuela? Do you want to live in the more cartel-controlled parts of Mexico? Do you want to live in some other parts of the world? Because you are bringing that part of the world en masse, and that obviously has consequences. One of the reasons they need this kind of open borders, they need this endless churn of immigration, is that when you look at the voting statistics for Hispanics, they talk about the Latino vote like it's just a simple block vote. We've seen in past elections that is not the case. The numbers really start shifting when you get to third-generation voters. There are major differences there start popping up. And there are differences by country. Obviously, the myth about unified Latino-Hispanic thing is itself very much an invention, but I don't want to get too much into the weeds of that. But they need a new flow of people who really don't speak English very well, are not properly immersed in American priorities. They don't really know what's going on. You can have the ballot harvesters come out to them, especially in places like California. The ballot harvesters are going to go to them. They're going to, fill out the ballots for them and walk away. You've got third-generation people that's not going to work with them so much anymore. So they need this flow of migrants. They need them to not assimilate. They need them to be reliant on local newspapers, local radio, Spanish language, Vietnamese language, whatever it is. They want them hooked up because they can control those community groups. And those community groups also double as an election turnout workers for them. So, they have federal government, local government funding for all these, the local mosque and the Pakistani community organization and so on and so forth. They fund them. Those people turn out to vote for them, and that's fine. They know it's going to stop working past a certain point. These people are going to learn English. Some of them are going to assimilate, others are not. But the more you bring them in en masse, the more you can create these kind of ghettos, and you can slow the process down. And if they hit the numbers, if they play this kind of demographic money ball enough, they can tilt the entire demographic structure of the country. And at that point, they control things, and it doesn't matter anymore.
Dan, where can people find your work?
Well, I have my own blog at danielgreenfield.org. I'm also a showman journalism fellow at the David Horowitz Freedom Center, and we do a lot of immigration reporting, and we really value your organization's work in that regard.
Daniel Greenfield, thank you for joining us, and please come again.
Thank you. That was fantastic.
So, Matt, that was an interesting discussion, and I wanted to ask you something. It seems like with these sanctuary cities, they've been around for a long time now, and a lot of us have known they're destined to fail. But it seems like it's almost this perfect storm right now with the sanctuary mayors and their mindset, the Biden administration with its border policies. It's all coming together, and we couldn't ask for a better example of why the sanctuary concept is destined to fail.
Yeah, essentially everything that we have claimed all along that is wrong with the immigration policies are all converging and happening at once. So you have a massive number of people with no effort to try and assimilate them. The bulk of them are coming from cultures that are drastically different from that of the United States. We're seeing this with what happened with the Laken Riley case. We're seeing this with the child rapist / male prostitute who was arrested by ICE in my hometown of Lynn, Massachusetts. My hometown is a good example. I grew up in Lynn, and it was a pretty ethnically diverse place when I was there. You had a huge Greek immigrant community. We had some Estonians and Lithuanians. There was a Polish immigrant community. There was a large group of Spanish speakers from Puerto Rico who are not immigrants in the traditional sense because they are citizens, but they're people who come from a different language background. And everybody wanted to fit in and be able to live together peacefully. And you didn't have anybody saying, no, this is the area where we only speak Estonian or we only speak Polish. You may have had neighborhoods where businesses that catered to people from that background were more prevalent, things like that. But there weren't people trying to balkanize themselves and live exactly the way they were living in the old country once they got to Lynn. The stuff with the crimes really bothers me because when I was a trial attorney with ICE and when I was an immigration judge, I saw that there were much, much, much higher degrees of sexual crimes against children and domestic violence against women in a lot of these different groups. And so what you have is this massive number of people unchecked coming into the United States. There's no desire to assimilate. They're not being asked to assimilate by the sanctuary communities that they're going to or the federal government. This has coincided with these terrible defund the police and no bail ideas, so that you had those individuals who participated in a mass assault against NYPD officers were released without bail and then are flipping the bird at cameras as they're walking away from the courthouse, and then were promptly arrested again for other crimes. So yeah, you're right. It's the perfect storm. And we're seeing every bad thing that is associated with loose, non-enforcement minded immigration policies happening at once and happening over and over and over again without the current administration trying to stop any of it.
We've seen some sanctuary mayors in the last few years who have been positively buffoonish. I'm thinking of Bill de Blasio, Lori Lightfoot, now Brandon Johnson. But this Kelly Girtz has really struck a nerve in a lot of people because that press conference he held really enraged a lot of people. What is it about that guy when you watch that so infuriated people?
Oh, he's got such a cavalier approach and he's so condescending. He seems to be saying, oh, there's no data that would support any connection whatsoever. But here we have in his sanctuary district, which he's trying to say was not a sanctuary jurisdiction when it clearly was. And you have a migrant who, one, I think as our guest Daniel Greenfield mentioned, entering the United States without authorization is a crime. So you begin your relationship with the United States with a crime. Generally, people who are willing to do that are going to be people who are willing to continue breaking the law if it's in their best interest. So you had this guy who broke the law to come into the United States. His wife publicly said that they got married specifically because they wanted to file a joint asylum claim and they were told it would be stronger that way. And he was arrested in New York and then let go, didn't appear for his hearing there. Then he commits a crime in Georgia. And I think this is a perfect example of what Mr. Greenfield said, which is if you know there are no consequences to a crime, it makes it much easier to commit it. And people who are predisposed to committing those crimes will go ahead and do it when they think there's going to be no major consequences. And who suffered for that? It's not Kelly Girtz. It was Laken Riley and her family. I mean, this is a beautiful young woman who was going to nursing school, by all accounts was a kind, caring person who was well loved by the community of students that she was a member of. And she was going into a shortage profession that we have here in the United States in order to care for people who are in need. And now her life is cut short. And you have Kelly Girtz, who's the politician who took an oath to support and defend the Constitution and protect people like Laken Riley, trying to defend communities of immigrants, saying, oh, this person is an outlier. And yet the very same week that this happened, there were about 5 or 6 other incidents. There was the individual who apparently had some kind of gang affiliation who shot a 2-year-old in Maryland who was an illegal alien. We had the individual that we spoke about earlier in the podcast who shot 3 police officers, who was, if I had to guess, I haven't seen anything that says this, but he fits the profile of the Jamaican Shower Posse, which is a Jamaican criminal gang. And they're called the Shower Posse because they shower their enemies with lead. Has nothing to do with shower as you and I know it. When I was a trial attorney with ICE, I prosecuted the deportation of an individual who almost fit that profile to a T. And he too was a person, he had committed a murder, done time for it, exited the United States while being escorted by 2 deportation officers, and then snuck back into the U.S. from Jamaica, and he was involved in dogfighting and drug trafficking. So nothing that's happening here is new. It's just that the open borders, pro-illegal alien, anti-borders contingent has been forced to confront this, not just sweep it under the rug like they did before. And, a lot of people who are aware of immigration policy and border management, how it works, have been saying right along that if the administration did this and left the border open, this is exactly what was going to happen. It's not rocket science. This is very easy to predict.
Kelly Girtz struck me as that smug professor you had in college who thinks he's more enlightened than everyone else. And he's got these fringe, whacked out ideas. And if he kept it in the faculty lounge, that would be fine. But the problem is he's got a position of trust in a society, in a town, where he's supposed to be safeguarding the town. And yet he's clearly prioritizing the well-being of foreign nationals over the residents of the town he's supposed to protect. And that's where it gets dangerous.
Well, he's experiencing cognitive dissonance right now because he's forced to confront the illogic in the positions that he's assumed. And so he's saying, oh, there's no indication that there's any kind of connection between immigration and what happened. Well, yeah, there is in this particular instance, even if you don't want to accept that it's happened anywhere else. He really needs to accept that in this particular instance, this person shouldn't have been here. They already committed a crime in New York. They weren't deported following the commission of that crime. And what happened? he committed another crime and he escalated. He went more violent. And they haven't talked about the details of this. And, thank God for the benefit of this poor woman's family. But why would he attack her and murder her while she's jogging? Pretty clearly, he attempted to sexually assault her or rob her. There had to be some other motive. And if there isn't, that's even more frightening because that means that he's a serial killer and he enjoys killing people for the sake of killing people. Now, in any of those three circumstances, do you want this individual wandering around the college campus where your kids are studying? Either a rapist, a violent robber, or a serial killer? I mean, there really aren't a whole lot of other options. And this is somebody who is being allowed loose in the community, and the mayor, who is responsible for protecting that community, is more worried about how this individual is classified and how the wider community of migrants is classified than he is about the poor constituent who had her life violently cut short at like age 22. And then, just to be really blunt about this, what was this guy going to do for the United States? I mean, if you want to talk about this in purely economic terms and just be very mercenary about the whole thing, this guy was driving DoorDash or something like that for a living. This girl was going to become a nurse. And, even if she just was a standard run-of-the-mill, and I don't say that in any way to take anything away from nursing, but even if she just was a standard nurse at a hospital, she's still doing 10,000 times more for this community where she grew up, apparently, than this guy ever will. And you also have the possibility that she might have gone on to become a nurse practitioner, nurse anesthetist, a physician's assistant, or maybe even go to medical school and become a doctor. And that's all gone. And what is this chooch Girtz worrying about? He's worrying about, we don't want migrants to look bad, and we don't want anyone to tar and feather this guy. I mean, it's just the most absurd thing that I can recall hearing in politics in a long time.
Did you also notice in Girtz's press conference, he said, this crime is a result of the actions of the individual or something like that. How convenient, because that absolves him. It absolves the sanctuary policies in New York where he was being held for child endangerment and they refused to cooperate with the ICE detainer request. Normally, you would say, yes, you're responsible for your own actions. But in this case, it really glosses over and shields the people who contributed to the problem.
Well, there's two things I would point out there. One, that's mighty convenient because a lot of his progressive-leaning policies are ones that don't acknowledge personal responsibility. But yet when it's convenient for him to use in this particular circumstance to deflect criticism from the actions he's taken, then he's all about personal responsibility. And then the other thing was he tried to blame it on the previous president of the United States and says, he referred to migrants in the most vile of terms. Well, no, what he actually did was he pointed out that a number of countries are not necessarily sending us their best people because they turn out to be rapists and murderers. I mean, good Lord, if there is a case that proves the truth of that statement, it's this one. I mean, this woman is minding her own business, having a jog on a college campus, which in the minds of, every American that's seen movies about college from Animal House on up, sees as a place where young people can safely be young people, where they can learn and build a future. And this poor woman is jogging on a trail there and all of a sudden gets assaulted and murdered. I mean, it's just to think that Girtz has the audacity to either chalk this up to personal responsibility as a way of deflecting criticism from his failed policies, or to blame it on the prior president because he said something that was truthful about a certain segment of the migrant population. I mean, it's just hypocritical beyond belief, but it represents a relationship with the truth that is so loose that it's offensive to hear the man speak.
In case some people out there are feeling bad for Mayor Girtz, if in fact he is driven from office by his constituents, I'm sure there'll be a fierce bidding war between Harvard, CNN, and MSNBC for his services. So I think he's going to land somewhere where they're going to appreciate his views.
Oh, yeah, I'm pretty sure he's going to go teach Marxist public administration in some university somewhere. Ironically, it might even be the one in, the University of Georgia in Athens. I don't know. I grew up in a blue-collar family in a mill town amongst policemen and firefighters. And I just don't understand how people can have this airy-fairy, la-di-da-di, utopianist view of the world, especially when they're confronted with reality. I mean, I think if you're any kind of a logical thinking human being with an open mind, you have to at least take a look at this and go, wow, this guy was like this. How many other people did we let across the border that are going to behave in the same fashion? And notice, I didn't make any general statements about migrants as a group. I just said that if you're responsible for public safety and you see something like this happen once, and you've got two brain cells that you can rub together, you have to be able to look at this and go, well, just as a pure matter of statistics, what is the likelihood of this happening again? And you should be able to do that even in a vacuum of experience. If this was the first migrant that ever came across, you should be able to look at it objectively and go, maybe something's not right here. But experience has shown us that this happens on a regular basis. You had Kate Steinle. You had Molly Tibbetts, the college student in Iowa who was abducted, raped, murdered, and stuffed in a trunk. Both of those crimes committed by illegal aliens. You had a 20-year-old woman just across the border in Maryland last year who was autistic, who was attacked, raped, and then murdered by an MS-13 gang member. You have the cases we've seen this week in this area, which is, we've mentioned these before today, but the individual who apparently was running from Jamaica, running a dogfighting ring, who shot 3 cops when they tried to arrest him. And then you had this individual who was involved in shooting a 2-year-old, plus the arrest of the child rapist in Lynn, Massachusetts by ICE. I mean, even if that's a minuscule percentage of the current population of migrants that are coming over the border, that population of migrants is so massive that you still are talking about a huge number of criminals. And we're seeing it happen. It's in the news. And yet you have people like Girtz going, hey, Brian, Matt, don't believe your lying eyes. Believe me. It's just the absurdity of it and the profound disrespect for the citizens of the United States is just shocking. I realize that politics is an ugly business and public administration is not always easy, but this is a guy who just got up and insulted all of the taxpayers, voters, and citizens in the United States because he's lying straight to their face. And I'm not even sure he believes the ridiculousness that he's spouting.
So to wrap up, do you think the public has reached a point of no return on sanctuary policies where they're just fully awakened now and they're not going to allow it? Or are they going to forget about it once the new series of reality shows come in the fall?
Unfortunately, I think that, the current administration seems to be making noises about invoking 1182F and gaining control of the border. If they do that, things go back to normal, people are going to forget. I mean, think about what happened. September 11th happened. We had this horrible attack. We implemented all of these immigration-related security measures. And then round about the time the 5th anniversary of the September 11th attacks hit, we had forgotten about all of them. So I think there is a significant danger that this will just all get swept under the rug and we'll go on with the same ridiculous policies. The sad part of this is what will force a change is if people continue to be victimized. And of course, the people in charge of running the country should be concerned about American citizens not being victimized. And it just strikes me as tragic that that is what is probably going to happen before one of the adults in the room says, we can't do this. This is ridiculous. Who is this helping? It's helping people who are not U.S. citizens or nationals at the expense of U.S. citizens. We're the government of the United States. That's not what we're all about. This isn't what's supposed to happen. Is that going to happen? I hope so. But watching what's been going on, I don't hold out hope that unless there's some kind of drastic change, that's actually going to happen. Thanks for tuning in to the No Border, No Country podcast. You can find us all over the web, particularly at Spotify, on X, and on YouTube. Please tune in, stab the like button, stab the subscribe button, And if you'd like to get more information on Early and what we do, you can take a look at www.early.org, our website, and there's a place there to make a donation if you'd like to support the work that Early does.